It started with the damn boots. I came home one night, bone tired from a long day laying concrete, and there they were, two big, filthy work boots by the back door. Not mine. Not Ethan's. And I couldn't imagine Mia, my 12-year-old, bringing home something like that. I bent down, gave them a closer look. Scuffed leather, thick with dried mud, and a smell like they'd been out in a field for a week. I figured, maybe Ethan borrowed them. He's been working odd landscaping jobs since school let out, and kids his age don't think twice about dragging mud through the house. Ethan! I called out, holding up one of the boots like a trophy. He came around the corner, spoon halfway to his mouth, still chewing cereal. What? These yours? He frowned like I'd asked him something stupid. No. Why would they be mine? Somebody's gotta claim them. Who brought them here? That's when Mia chimed in, without even looking up from her phone. Mom did. She said they're Henry's. I froze. Henry? Who's Henry? She gave me one of those preteen shrugs that make you want to pull your hair out. The guy with the tractor. You know, from the barbecue? I blinked. Henry. Yeah, I vaguely remembered him. Farm guy. Young, fit, with a permanent grin like he didn't have a care in the world. Olivia had been chatting him up at the barbecue, but then again, she talked to everyone. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now? Why does Henry's stuff end up in my house? Mia rolled her eyes. I don't know. Maybe because he helped her fix the garden gate? I didn't remember anything about a broken gate. I also didn't remember hiring anyone to do it. That's what bothered me the most. I brushed it off, though. Maybe she'd mentioned it, and I wasn't paying attention. I'm not perfect. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, I came home early from a job site, hoping to grab a quick shower before dinner. The first thing I noticed was the tire tracks. Deep, ugly ruts cut right into the middle of my lawn. I stood there, staring at the damage, trying to match the tracks to my truck or Olivia's car. They didn't fit. Whatever made those marks had some serious weight behind it. When Olivia got home later that evening, I was still outside, staring at the mess. She got out of her car, grocery bags in hand, and barely glanced at me. Hey, babe, she said, breezing past me toward the house. I followed her in. What happened to the lawn? She stopped, turned back to me, and tilted her head like I'd asked her why the sky was blue. Oh, Henry drove the tractor up to the house. I told him it was fine. You told him it was fine? Her smile tightened just a bit. Relax, Jerry. He was just helping me move those planters out of the shed. You know, the ones we talked about last week? I didn't know. We never talked about planters. But what was I supposed to say? It felt stupid to push the issue, so I nodded like an idiot and let it go. Except I couldn't let it go. By the third time Henry showed up, I wasn't just suspicious. I was furious. I always thought I was a pretty observant guy. In my line of work, you don't get to miss details. You spot a hairline crack in a foundation before it becomes a collapse. You notice when materials don't line up right or when someone tries to cut corners. And yet, I missed the signs that were right in front of me in my own house. After the third visit from Henry, my gut wouldn't let it go. Something was off, and no amount of Olivia's breezy explanations was going to make it feel right. That Saturday morning, I decided to test a theory. Olivia had mentioned earlier in the week that she was heading to a yoga class in the afternoon. It wasn't unusual, she went at least once a week, sometimes twice. She'd leave with her mat rolled under her arm, kiss me on the cheek, and come back 2 hours later, glowing like she just had the best stretch of her life. But this time, I paid attention. I mean really paid attention. She left at 1:30 sharp, just like she said she would, and I waited exactly 10 minutes before getting into my car. The idea felt ridiculous at first, like I was some paranoid fool playing detective in his own marriage. But I couldn't shake the need to know. I kept my distance as I followed her sedan. She didn't head toward the yoga studio. She drove out of town, past the main strip, and into the backroads that led toward the farming district. My stomach sank as the scenery changed from storefronts and driveways to open fields and tractor sheds. She finally turned into a gravel driveway that led to an old barn. It wasn't run down, exactly, but it wasn't what you'd call well kept either. There were no other cars in sight, no other people around, just Olivia, stepping out of her car with a casual ease that made my blood boil. I pulled over just out of sight, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She walked up to the barn door, knocked twice, and a moment later, it swung open. And there he was. Henry. He was shirtless, a dirty rag slung over one shoulder, like he'd just finished working on some machinery. He smiled when he saw her, not the polite kind of smile you give a neighbor, but the kind that said everything without words. I didn't need to see what happened next to know. But I stayed. I stayed long enough to see her step inside and the door close behind her. I sat there for a long time, staring at that barn. Part of me wanted to kick the door in, drag Henry out by the collar, and demand an explanation that I already knew wouldn't change anything. The other part of me didn't know what the hell to do. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, I finally drove home. My head was pounding, and my chest felt like someone had put a cinder block on it. When Olivia came home that evening, she was as cheerful as ever, chatting about her yoga class and how it was so restorative. I watched her move around the kitchen, setting the table for dinner like everything was perfectly normal. I said nothing. Not yet. The next day, I started digging. I went out to the shed where Olivia claimed those mysterious planters were stored. Sure enough, they were there exactly where they'd been for months, untouched and still covered in cobwebs. I felt like an idiot for not checking sooner. I started asking quiet questions around the neighborhood. Nothing obvious, just small talk with people who'd been at the barbecue or who might have seen Henry around. It didn't take long to get a clearer picture of who this guy really was. Henry wasn't just the friendly tractor guy helping everyone out of the goodness of his heart. He had a reputation, a bad one. He'd moved to town less than a year ago, taking up work at the local farming co-op. He was known for being handy, sure, but also for being too friendly with certain women. One neighbor, Mrs. Keaton, let slip that she'd warned her own daughter-in-law to steer clear of Henry after catching him in a compromising position with another married woman. "It's none of my business," she said, shaking her head, "but that man's trouble. Always sniffing around where he shouldn't." I clenched my fists as she talked, trying to keep my expression neutral. Trouble wasn't the word I'd use. By the end of the week, I had enough pieces to see the full picture. Olivia wasn't just neighborly. She wasn't just getting help. She was sleeping with him. And I'd been the fool standing on the sidelines, watching it all happen. It was late Friday night when I finally confirmed everything. Olivia had gone to bed early, claiming she was exhausted. I stayed downstairs, nursing a beer and staring at the TV without really watching it. At some point, I grabbed my keys and drove out to that barn. It was dark and quiet when I pulled up, but something in me wanted to see it for myself, even if no one was there. I walked up to the door and pushed it open. The inside smelled like hay and grease, and there, in the corner, was a makeshift bedroll. It wasn't much, just a blanket and a pillow, but it was enough. Enough to make my blood boil all over again. I drove home, my mind racing with all the things I could do next. Confront her. Confront him. Burn the damn barn down. But when I walked into the house and saw Olivia asleep on the couch, looking so peaceful and untouched by any of this, my anger turned into something colder. This wasn't going to end with yelling or fists. This was going to end on my terms, in my way. And I wasn't going to stop until she knew exactly what it felt like to have everything ripped out from under her. I couldn't keep it in anymore. The knowledge was like poison in my veins, and every moment I spent in the same room as Olivia felt unbearable. By the time Sunday rolled around, I decided it was time to confront her. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee, still in her robe. The sight of her standing there, acting like nothing was wrong, made my stomach churn. "We need to talk," I said, leaning against the doorway. She glanced up at me, startled by my tone. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I know about Henry. Her hand froze mid-pour. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the coffee filling her mug, as if she could avoid the conversation by focusing hard enough. "Know what, exactly," she said finally, her voice calm but strained. "Don't play dumb, Olivia. I know everything. I followed you. I saw you go to that barn." That got her attention. She set the coffee pot down and turned to face me, her expression a mix of shock and defiance. "You followed me? Don't try to turn this around on me," I snapped. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around with that guy, and you think you can just act like it's nothing?" Her face hardened. "I don't have to explain myself to you, Jerry." "The hell you don't!" I shouted. "We've been married for 15 years. I deserve to know why you're doing this. What's going on in your head?" For a second, I thought she might deny it again. But then her face changed, anger replacing whatever shred of guilt might have been there. "You want to know why, Jerry? Fine. You want the truth? Here it is, you're the problem." I blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She threw her hands up, her voice rising. "You don't get it, do you? All you do is sit around drinking beer and watching TV. You've completely checked out of this marriage. When was the last time you even looked at me, Jerry? I mean, really looked at me?" Her words hit me like a hammer. "That's not true." "Oh, it's not? When was the last time you took me out? The last time you put any effort into this relationship? You think I just woke up one day and decided to cheat? No, Jerry. This has been building for years, and you've been too blind to see it." I tried to speak, but she didn't let me. "You don't touch me anymore. You don't talk to me. I felt invisible in this house for God knows how long. And Henry." She hesitated, her voice cracking. "Henry made me feel alive again. He's young, Jerry. He's strong, full of energy. He looks at me like I'm worth something. And I needed that. I deserve that." My chest tightened. Hearing her say it out loud hurt more than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way she justified it, like I was the one who had driven her into his arms. "You never said any of this to me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not once. How was I supposed to fix it if I didn't know?" She laughed bitterly. "Fix it? Jerry, you don't fix things. You ignore them until they fall apart. That's what you've done with this marriage, and now you're acting all shocked that it's broken." I stared at her, feeling something inside me break. "So, what happens now, Olivia? What's the plan? You run off with Henry and leave me and the kids behind? Or do you just keep sneaking around while we pretend everything's fine?" She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know, Jerry. What do you want me to say? That I'll end it and come back to this?" She gestured around the kitchen like it was some kind of prison. "I can't do that. I can't go back to being ignored, to being miserable. And I'm just supposed to accept that?" "I don't know," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I don't know what you're supposed to do. All I know is I can't keep living like this." I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just never seen her like this before. Either way, the Olivia I thought I knew was gone, and I had no idea how to bring her back or if I even wanted to. "Do you even want to fix this?" I asked finally, my voice quiet. "Or are we done?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumping. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know, Jerry. I don't know if we can." It felt like the final nail in the coffin. Whatever hope I'd been clinging to evaporated in that moment. "Then I guess that's it," I said, turning to leave the room. "Jerry." I stopped but didn't look back. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said softly. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations. You did. And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her coffee and her excuses. Walking away from Olivia that morning didn't feel like closure, it felt like the beginning of something darker. Her excuses, her justifications, the way she turned everything around on me, it all fueled a fire I couldn't extinguish. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed, not after what she'd done. If Olivia wanted to destroy our marriage, I'd make damn sure she felt the consequences. The first thing I did was pull myself together. If I was going to make my move, I couldn't afford to let her see how broken I felt. I spent the next week pretending everything was normal. I went to work, came home, ate dinner at the table with her and the kids, even managed to smile when Ethan cracked one of his dumb jokes. But every night, after everyone went to bed, I got to work. I started with the finances. Olivia wasn't much for numbers, so she left the bills and accounts to me. That made things easier. I began moving money out of our joint checking account and into one she didn't know about. Not a lot at once, just small amounts every few days, enough to keep it under the radar. Next, I went through her emails, her texts, her social media. She'd been careless, leaving her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter one night. I wasn't looking for anything specific, I already knew what she'd done. What I wanted was evidence, something solid to use if things got ugly. And I found plenty. Messages from Henry, not just about their rendezvous but about how great it felt to be together. Pictures, too. Selfies of them smiling in that goddamn barn, like they didn't have a care in the world. I forwarded everything to my email and saved it to a secure drive. By the time I finished, I had enough dirt to bury both of them. The next step was a bit more public. I started spreading rumors, carefully, subtly, throughout the neighborhood. At first, it was small things, like casually mentioning to the Keatons that Olivia seemed to be spending a lot of time helping out at the co-op. Or joking with another neighbor about how Henry must have a lot of free time on his hands to keep visiting Olivia. People started talking. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the end of the month, I overheard someone at the grocery store whispering about Olivia and that young farmhand. She noticed, of course. "Something's going on," she said one evening as we sat in the living room. She was scrolling through her phone, a frown on her face. "What do you mean?" I asked, not looking up from the newspaper. "People are acting weird." Mary Keaton barely said 2 words to me at the PTA meeting. And Emily didn't even wave back when I saw her at the park. I shrugged. Maybe they're just busy. She didn't buy it, but she didn't press the issue. The final piece of my plan came together a week later. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and it presented itself in the form of our anniversary. Olivia didn't bring it up, probably too awkward, given everything that had happened. But I did. I told her I'd planned something special, a way for us to reconnect. She seemed skeptical but agreed. That Saturday, I packed a picnic basket, loaded it into the truck, and told her we were going for a drive. She didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't volunteer the information. It wasn't until we pulled up to the barn that she realized something was off. "What are we doing here?" she asked, her voice tense. I killed the engine and turned to face her. "I thought we could have a picnic. You know, in your favorite spot." She stared at me, her face pale. "Jerry, I got out of the truck before she could finish. She didn't follow me right away, but eventually, she climbed out, looking like she wanted to be anywhere but there. I led her inside, where I'd set up a folding table and chairs. On the table were printouts of the emails, texts, and photos I'd collected. She froze when she saw them. "What is this?" she whispered. "This," I said, my voice cold, "is the truth. And now, you're going to tell me what you plan to do about it." She didn't answer. Her eyes darted around the barn like she was looking for an escape. "I'll tell you what's going to happen," I said, stepping closer. "You're going to pack your things and leave. You're going to explain to the kids why you're leaving. And you're going to do it without dragging me through the mud." She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Because if you don't, everyone in this town is going to see these." I gestured to the table. Every neighbor, every friend, every parent at the school. Even Henry's boss. You think he'll keep his job after this? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, she said quietly. I'll leave. It wasn't the victory I'd imagined, but it was enough. I didn't say anything else as we packed up and drove home. She started packing that night, and by the end of the week, she was gone. The kids took it hard, of course. Ethan barely spoke to me for days, and Mia cried herself to sleep more than once. I told them as much of the truth as I could without turning them against her. She made some mistakes, I said. But she still loves you. And so do I. Olivia's move to Henry's place wasn't a surprise. After she left the house, it was just a matter of time. People in town talked about it, of course. The rumors of their affair had already made the rounds, so when she moved in with him, it only confirmed what everyone suspected. I thought I'd put it all behind me, let her live her new life while I focused on the kids and rebuilding some sense of normalcy. For the first couple of weeks, things seemed to settle. Olivia called Ethan and Mia regularly, checking in on them and asking about school. I didn't stop her, after all, she was still their mother, and I didn't want to take that away from them. But soon enough, I started noticing small changes in their behavior. Ethan, my 15-year-old, grew distant. He was always a bit moody, typical teenager, but now it felt different. He avoided me at dinner, spent more time in his room, and gave me one-word answers when I tried to talk to him. Mia, my youngest, was more subtle. She still smiled and talked to me, but I could feel the shift. She'd drop little comments that didn't sit right, like, "Mom says it must be hard for you to take care of everything on your own," or, "Mom thinks you should let us stay with her for a while." It all came to a head one Saturday evening. I'd planned a simple movie night, just the three of us. I thought maybe it would help bring us closer again. Mia was excited at first, but Ethan flat out refused. "I've got plans," he said, grabbing his jacket. "Plans? With who?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "Just friends," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Something about the way he said it made me push further. "You're not meeting your mom, are you?" He froze for a second, then turned to glare at me. "So what if I am?" I took a deep breath. "Ethan, she can see you whenever she wants, but sneaking around isn't the way to do it." "She's not sneaking," he snapped. "She's just trying to make up for what you ruined." That hit me like a freight train. What I ruined? He crossed his arms, his face twisted in anger. "Yeah. Mom said she left because of you. That you're the one who made her miserable. You never cared about her, and now you're trying to keep us away from her, too." I stared at him, speechless. "She said she's going to fix it," he continued. "She's going to make sure we live with her, where we belong." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ethan, that's not how it happened. She left because of you," he yelled, cutting me off. "Stop pretending like you're the victim." He stormed out before I could say another word. I sat there in silence for a long time, my mind racing. Olivia was poisoning them against me. She was trying to turn them against their own father, and from the sound of it, she had plans to take them away entirely. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next day, I sat Ethan down. It wasn't easy, he was still angry, barely looking at me, but I needed to get to the bottom of it. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I need you to tell me exactly what your mom's been saying." He hesitated, fidgeting with his phone. "Why? So you can twist it around and make her the bad guy?" "I just want to understand," I said. "That's all." He finally looked at me, his expression a mix of defiance and uncertainty. "She said you didn't care about her. That you were lazy, and all you did was watch TV and drink. That's why she left. And now she wants us to live with her because you can't handle everything on your own." I nodded, letting the words sink in. "And what do you think, Ethan? Do you believe her?" He shrugged, his tough facade cracking just a bit. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, she seems happy now. She said Henry's helping her start fresh, and she wants us to be part of it. I felt a surge of anger but kept it in check. Ethan, do you know why your mom really left? He didn't answer. She cheated, I said, my voice firm but not harsh. She had an affair with Henry, and that's why she left. She didn't leave because of me. She left because she made a choice, a selfish one. His eyes widened, but he didn't speak. I've tried to keep things civil for your sake and Mia's, I continued. I didn't want you two to get caught in the middle of this, but I need you to know the truth. He looked away, his jaw clenched. Whatever she's told you about me, Ethan, I need you to think about what you've seen with your own eyes. Who's been here for you? Who's been making sure you have what you need? He didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. That conversation was a wake-up call. Olivia wasn't just content with leaving, she wanted to take the kids, too. And if I didn't act fast, she might succeed. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I want to file for divorce, I said. And I want full custody of the kids. He paused. Full custody? That's a big step. Are you sure? She's trying to turn them against me, I explained. I need to protect them. And I want her to pay child support. If I'm going to be the only parent providing for them, she should contribute. He agreed to start the paperwork, warning me that it wouldn't be an easy fight. Olivia had a right to see the kids, and the courts wouldn't cut her off without a compelling reason. But I was ready. I gathered everything I had: proof of her affair, messages from Henry, even testimonies from neighbors who'd seen them together before she left. I wasn't just fighting for my kids. I was fighting for my family, for the life she'd tried to destroy. Olivia was about to learn that actions have consequences. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with its worn wooden benches and plain white walls. Nothing about it looked like the kind of place where people's lives were torn apart and reassembled. But as I sat there waiting for the hearing to start, I realized it didn't matter how the room looked, what mattered was the decision that would come out of it. I'd prepared for this day for weeks. My lawyer had gathered everything: the evidence of Olivia's affair, the testimony from neighbors, even messages from Henry and Olivia that painted a clear picture of her choices. My goal wasn't to humiliate her, I just wanted the truth out there. Most importantly, I wanted to protect my kids from being dragged into her chaotic new life. When Olivia walked into the courtroom, she was composed, but her eyes were blazing. She didn't look at me as she took her seat with her lawyer. She'd come in ready for a fight, and so had I. The judge entered, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who looked like she'd seen it all. As she began the proceedings, Olivia's lawyer launched into an emotional plea, painting her as a devoted mother who had made sacrifices for the family and now wanted to repair the damage. He acknowledged the affair, he had no choice with the evidence we'd submitted, but argued it didn't diminish her rights as a mother. She has been the primary caregiver for these children for most of their lives, he said. Her bond with them is irreplaceable, and removing them from her custody would do irreparable harm. I listened in silence, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I knew this tactic was coming. It didn't matter what Olivia had done, they were going to frame this as a battle over who loved the kids more. When it was my turn, my lawyer laid out our case calmly and methodically. He presented the evidence of her affair, the messages, the witnesses who'd seen her sneaking around with Henry before she left. He highlighted how I'd been the one to provide stability for Ethan and Mia while Olivia pursued her new life. The defendant's actions have already caused significant emotional distress for the children, he said, his voice steady. My client is asking for full custody not to punish her, but to ensure that the children have a stable, supportive environment moving forward. Olivia's calm facade cracked the moment my lawyer mentioned child support. Her head snapped toward me, her face twisted in fury. This is ridiculous, she blurted out, cutting her lawyer off. The judge raised a hand to silence her, but Olivia wasn't done. He's the reason I left, she shouted, pointing at me. He's a lousy husband who couldn't be bothered to pay attention to me or the kids. And now he wants me to pay him? For what? Sitting around drinking beer and pretending to be a father? The judge's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Davenport, control yourself. You will have an opportunity to speak. Olivia's lawyer whispered something to her, trying to calm her down, but she waved him off. When it was her turn to speak, she went on the offensive, her voice trembling with anger. I've been the one raising those kids, she said, glaring at me. I've been the one helping with homework, packing lunches, going to parent-teacher conferences. He doesn't know the first thing about being a parent. And now he wants to take them away from me because I made one mistake? He's not even fit to have custody. She turned to the judge, her voice rising. I'm their mother. They need me. No court has the right to take them away from me. I sat there, forcing myself to stay calm as she painted me as a useless father and a failure of a husband. I wanted to yell back, to defend myself, but I knew that wouldn't help my case. Instead, I focused on the judge, who watched Olivia with a look of measured patience. When it was my turn to respond, I kept my voice steady. Your Honor, I'm not perfect. But I've been there for my kids every day since Olivia left. I've made sure they have what they need, emotionally and financially. I'm not asking for full custody because I want to hurt her, I'm asking for it because I want to protect my children. Olivia's actions have shown that her priorities are elsewhere. My priority is Ethan and Mia, and I'll do whatever it takes to give them a stable, loving home. The judge nodded and scribbled something in her notes. The back and forth continued for hours. Olivia's lawyer argued that separating the children from their mother would be cruel and unnecessary. My lawyer countered that Olivia's decision to leave for Henry and her attempts to manipulate the kids against me showed a lack of judgment that couldn't be ignored. As the day dragged on, Olivia became more agitated. At one point, she stood up and shouted, "This is all his fault. I wouldn't have had to leave if he wasn't such a miserable husband." The judge's gavel came down again, and Olivia's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. By the time the judge called a recess, I felt like I'd been through a war. Olivia's accusations, her anger, her refusal to take responsibility, it was exhausting. But I also felt a glimmer of hope. The judge didn't seem swayed by her emotional outbursts. She was focused on the facts, and the facts were on my side. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. She began by addressing Olivia. Mrs. Davenport, it's clear to me that you care deeply for your children, she said. However, your actions, specifically your affair and the circumstances surrounding your departure from the marital home, have created a situation that is not in their best interest. Stability is crucial for children, especially during a time of upheaval. She turned to me. Mr. Davenport, you have demonstrated a commitment to providing that stability. However, I also recognize the importance of maintaining a relationship between the children and their mother. The judge's decision was firm but measured. She granted me full physical custody of Ethan and Mia, citing Olivia's actions as a factor in her ruling. Olivia would have visitation rights 1 day a week, supervised if necessary. As for child support, the judge ruled in my favor. Olivia would be required to contribute financially to the children's upbringing, given her new living arrangement and income. Olivia exploded. She stood up, shouting at the judge about how unfair the ruling was, how I was using the kids against her, how it wasn't her fault that our marriage had fallen apart. The judge banged her gavel and warned her that any further outbursts would result in contempt of court. When the hearing ended, Olivia stormed out without a word to me. I sat there for a moment, letting the weight of the decision sink in. It wasn't a victory, not really. My marriage was over, my kids were caught in the middle, and nothing about this felt good. But it was the right decision. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally start rebuilding our lives. After the court ruling, life didn't return to normal, it shifted into a new kind of chaos. Winning custody of Ethan and Mia was a relief, but it came with its own set of challenges. I was now officially a single parent, juggling work, household responsibilities, and the emotional fallout of the divorce. And on top of that, there was Olivia. Her weekly visits with the kids began almost immediately. The first one was tense, to put it lightly. She showed up exactly at the time dictated by the court order, dressed immaculately, as if she were walking into a business meeting. I watched her pull into the driveway from the kitchen window, and for a second, I considered slamming the door in her face. Instead, I opened it before she could knock. "The kids are in the living room," I said shortly, stepping aside. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Thank you." And that was it. No pleasantries, no small talk. She walked into the house like she still belonged there, which annoyed me more than I cared to admit. Ethan and Mia were happy to see her, at least on the surface. They hugged her and chatted about their week while I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to organize the fridge. But even from a distance, I could feel the tension. Mia, ever the peacemaker, tried her best to keep the mood light, talking about her school project and asking Olivia about her new place. Ethan, on the other hand, was quiet, too quiet. He answered Olivia's questions with one-word responses, barely looking at her. When the hour was up, Olivia stood to leave. "I'll see you both next week," she said, kissing each of them on the forehead. Neither of them said much as she walked out the door. I closed it behind her and turned to find Ethan staring at the floor, his jaw tight. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded but didn't say anything. Mia, on the other hand, was more forthcoming. "It feels weird," she said. "Like she's trying too hard to act like everything's fine." "It's going to take time," I said, unsure if I was saying it for her benefit or mine. But time didn't seem to help. The visits continued every week, and every week, they left the kids more unsettled. Olivia's behavior became increasingly erratic. Sometimes she'd arrive in a great mood, showering them with gifts and promises of fun trips once everything settled down. Other times, she'd show up late, visibly agitated, and barely engage with them at all. One evening, after she'd left, Ethan finally let his frustration spill out. "She keeps saying she's going to fix everything," he said, pacing the living room. "But she doesn't even listen to us. It's all about her. How hard it is for her. How much she misses us. Like we're supposed to feel bad for her." I nodded, letting him vent. "It's okay to feel angry," I said. "You don't have to pretend everything's fine." "I just don't get it," he said, sitting heavily on the couch. "Why did she even leave if she cared so much? Why didn't she just—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "Ethan," I said gently, sitting next to him. "What happened between your mom and me wasn't your fault. And it wasn't your responsibility to fix it. She made her choices, and now we have to deal with them. But you and Mia come first. Always." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I just want things to go back to the way they were." "So do I said honestly. But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward." Moving forward, however, wasn't as simple as I made it sound. The financial strain hit hard. Between the mortgage, bills, and day-to-day expenses, I was barely scraping by. Olivia's child support payments helped, but they weren't enough to cover everything. I took on extra jobs where I could, doing side work for clients on weekends and evenings. It wasn't sustainable, but I didn't have a choice. The kids noticed, of course. "Do you have to work again tonight?" Mia asked one evening as I packed up my tools. "Yeah, just for a few hours," I said, ruffling her hair. "But I'll be back before bedtime." She didn't look convinced. "You're always working." "I'm doing my best," I said. "For you and Ethan." "I know," she said quietly. Balancing work and parenting was exhausting, but I refused to let it break me. Every spare moment I had, I spent with the kids, helping with homework, cooking dinner, even just sitting with them while they watched TV. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to remind them they weren't alone. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed determined to make things harder. She started pushing for more time with the kids, claiming that one visit a week wasn't enough. "I'm their mother," she said during one particularly heated phone call. "I have a right to see them." "You already see them every week," I said, my patience wearing thin. "That's more than fair, considering everything that's happened." "This isn't about you," she snapped. "It's about them. They need me, Jerry." What they need is stability, I said. And that's what I'm giving them. The argument went in circles, neither of us willing to back down. Eventually, she threatened to take me back to court. Do what you have to do, I said, hanging up. But the truth was, I couldn't afford another legal battle, not financially, and not emotionally. The last one had drained me, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to go through it again. In a few months. I'll admit, when I first heard the news, I laughed. Maybe it wasn't the most mature reaction, but after everything Olivia had put me through, it felt like justice had finally caught up to her. Henry, the man she'd left me and the kids for, had cheated on her. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, someone who had no idea how much I'd relished the update. She casually mentioned that Henry had been seen with another woman, someone younger, of course, and that Olivia was no longer living with him. Yeah, they broke up, the woman said, leaning in conspiratorially. Henry's always been a bit of a player. Not exactly husband material. I nodded, hiding my grin. I didn't feel sorry for Olivia, not even a little. She'd gambled everything on Henry, thinking she'd traded up, and now she was paying the price. I didn't mention any of this to Ethan or Mia. They didn't need to know, and I wasn't about to drag them into her drama. But part of me couldn't resist checking in on how far Olivia had fallen. A few weeks later, during one of her visits with the kids, I noticed the change in her. She looked worn out, her hair not as perfectly styled as usual, her clothes less polished. Even her confidence seemed to have taken a hit. "How've you been?" I asked casually when the kids ran upstairs to grab something. She glanced at me, her expression tight. "Fine." That one word said everything I needed to know. It wasn't long before the full picture came out. Olivia was living in a small room in a women's boarding house. It wasn't exactly a dormitory, but it wasn't much better, shared kitchen, shared bathrooms. She'd left Henry's place with barely more than her clothes and whatever she could carry. Her job, which once seemed stable, had also become precarious. She was barely making ends meet, scraping by on freelance gigs and part-time work. From what I gathered, she was juggling bills and struggling to keep her head above water. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't muster it. Still, when she called me a month later, I wasn't prepared for what she asked. "Jerry, I need to talk to you about the child support payments," she said, her voice subdued. I sighed, already bracing myself. "What about them?" I can't keep up," she admitted. "I've been trying, but things are tight right now." I let the silence drag for a moment, partly to let her stew and partly to think. I didn't need the money to survive, not really. I'd adjusted to life without her financial contributions, even if it meant working extra hours. But I also wasn't about to let her off the hook without something in return. "All right," I said finally. "I'll agree to temporarily pause the payments." "Thank you," she said quickly, relief evident in her voice. "But there's a condition," I added. "You don't ask for more time with the kids. No pushing for extra visits, no surprise drop-ins. You stick to the court order." Her pause told me everything I needed to know. She wanted to argue, but she didn't have the leverage. "Fine," she said at last. "I'll stick to the schedule." Good. The call ended, and I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Olivia had spent so long trying to blame me for her choices, yet here she was, facing the consequences of her own actions. The kids noticed the changes, too, though they didn't fully understand what was going on. Mia asked why her mom wasn't taking them out as much during her visits, and Ethan complained about how she seemed distracted when they talked. "Is Mom okay?" Mia asked one night as I tucked her in. "She's going through a tough time," I said carefully. "But she's strong. She'll figure it out." Mia frowned. "Do you think she misses us?" I hesitated. "I think she loves you, Mia. That hasn't changed." It was the best answer I could give without lying or overcomplicating things. Over the next few months, Olivia kept to the agreement. She visited the kids once a week, like clockwork, and never asked for more. I kept my promise, too, waiving the child support payments as long as she respected the boundaries. But the more I saw her, the more obvious it became that she was floundering. Her visits grew shorter, her energy lower. She didn't bring gifts anymore, didn't make big promises about the future. It was like the fire she'd once had, whether it was anger, pride, or stubbornness, had burned out. One evening, after dropping Mia and Ethan off with me, she lingered at the door. "Jerry," she said hesitantly. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She looked at me, her eyes tired. "Do you think they hate me?" "I wasn't expecting that." "Why would they hate you?" She shrugged, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Because I left. Because I messed up." "They're kids, Olivia," I said. "They don't think like that. They just want their mom to be there for them." She nodded but didn't say anything else. That moment stayed with me longer than I expected. For all the anger and resentment I'd felt toward Olivia, seeing her like that, broken, uncertain, stirred something in me. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a step toward letting go of the bitterness. As the months went on, I focused on what mattered: the kids, my work, and building a life that didn't revolve around Olivia or her mistakes. Her story wasn't mine anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.